And good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's local government education program provided by the University of Illinois Extension in partnership with the Illinois Association of County Administrators and the Illinois Association of County Board Members. We very much appreciate this opportunity for program collaboration. My name is Kathy Brown, and I serve as a community and economic development educator for the University of Illinois Extension. For sound quality, we will be muting microphones during the presentation. If you have any problems connecting, add those questions to the chat space as well, and we'll monitor that chat space and post comments and questions to our speakers at the end of the presentation. We're happy to welcome back the Executive Director of the Illinois Association of County Board Members, Kelly Murray, who will deliver remarks and introduce Taylor Anderson, who will provide us with the legislative update, as well as Brian Smith from Ohio Royster, who will add a few additional points on COVID-related regulations. We do want to encourage you to add your questions to the chat space during the presentation, and we'll be following up with question and answers at the conclusion of comments. Do know that participants all will receive slides and links to the resources and the recording from today's webinar. I want to thank you again to our presenters for their time in preparing for the presentation for us today. Kelly, I'll hand it over to you now.
Okay. Thank you, Kathy. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our annual legislative webinar in partnership with the University of Illinois Extension. I'll start by saying, to say 2020 has been a strange and unpredictable year would be an understatement. As local government officials, I know you have all faced some serious challenges in meeting the daily demands of public service, and also for the ongoing protections of your employees, which in a new aspect we will address today as well. The Illinois General Assembly spring session was severely interrupted by the coronavirus pandemic. Of the nearly 60 days on the Senate and House calendars for 2020, they met for less than 20 of those days. I think it was around 18 days. And then the governor never really called a special session of the Illinois legislature. So kind of mid-March, the session was interrupted, and then we went from there. Lawmakers eventually convened on May 20th for 3 days outside of the traditional Capitol setting, kind of to a downtown location for social distancing. And that's what they are doing today as we speak. With the lame duck session. So we're not really at the Capitol per se, the certain chamber is, and then the others are downtown. So as the short spring legislative session progressed, I think lawmakers had found themselves sort of preoccupied with the needs that were generated by COVID, and that resulted in the bulk of the bills passed in the spring. Then we went around, we came to veto session, which was also canceled. And as a result, only 3 new laws took effect January 1st of this year, as compared to more than 250 last year at this time. So our presentation today is going to recap some of the new laws that were enacted in 2020 that impact local government. However, we will conclude with comments on the current lame duck session as part of our ongoing policy agenda for county governments. But before we get started on the legislative portion, I wanted to say our office has received several inquiries from member counties regarding the adoption of mandatory vaccination policies as related to the COVID-19 vaccination. So with that, I want to introduce Brian Smith from our partner law firm of Ohio Royster. Brian concentrates his practice in the areas of employment law, and he's going to briefly address the issue of whether employers may require and enforce mandatory COVID-19 vaccinations before entering the workforce or the workplace. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian quickly. Brian?
Thank you, Kelly. As she mentioned, my name is Brian Smith. I'm coming from you today from Champaign. Appreciate you inviting me here. As you know, there are 2 vaccines that have currently been approved by the FDA, and they are rolling out to the states. I know for most everyone that I've talked to from the various counties, the rollout has been quite a bit slower than anticipated or desired, but it is happening and it's going to continue to happen. And that poses some interesting questions for employers. Just this morning, I was reviewing the news while I was drinking my coffee, and I saw that the LA County School Board issued a statement that when it becomes available for children, obviously there's no COVID vaccine yet available for anyone under the age of 16, but when that becomes available, the LA County School District is going to require it for attendance in class. Now that may be August, that may be 2020, we don't know, but these are issues that everyone is starting to look at and take a stance and a position on. And from an employer perspective, there are a few questions that are raised, and then there are a lot of other things and nuances to look at. And we can't get into in the next 10 minutes or so all of the details, but I would encourage you, consult with counsel before you implement a policy. Feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to answer questions that may come up. And please do, type them into the chat session here, and I'm happy to answer any questions at the conclusion of my presentation. So with what we've got right now, I think that for an employer, the short answer is this. The question I get asked is, can I mandate vaccines for my employees? And the short answer is yes, you can. The EEOC recently gave guidance on this very issue and essentially said, yes, you can mandate a vaccine. Now, as with most things, right, that comes with buts and nuances and other things to consider. And I think that we're going to discuss the three major ones. There are potentially others, but the three major ones are, the ADA, American with Disabilities Act, Title VII and religious objections, and then whether you are an at-will or CBA, collective bargaining agreement employer. And I think we'll start with the last of those is, in Illinois, unless stated otherwise, all employees are at will. They serve at the pleasure of their employer and can be fired for any reason, assuming that reason is not unlawful. And there are many unlawful reasons, right? The things that we think of most typically are race or gender. Now, I know I'm talking to a bunch of public officials, and at-will employment is very common in private sector, but relatively uncommon in the public sector. And most of you probably within your local governmental agencies have at least one or more workforce that is governed by a collective bargaining agreement. And if that is the case, the analysis that you need to take to determine whether or not you can mandate a vaccine, first and foremost, you have to negotiate it. That is something that you are going to need to address with the union. And there's no reason to drag the negotiation out for 2 years. Obviously, the time is of the essence, but if mandating a vaccine or coming up with some solution for a requirement that everyone get vaccinated is something that you want to pursue, it's something that needs to be discussed with your union. And if you reach an impasse, bring that for resolution sooner than later as things begin to roll out. So I'm not going to say any more about that other than I would urge everyone with everything here to be flexible, while everyone wants to take action quickly, there is a need to take it in a measured approach. And then I think the other thing is keep an eye out on changes, right? I anticipate that the EEOC, OSHA, DHS, and other agencies are going to be issuing further guidance on this. The EEOC has been doing a question and answer FAQ, and the number of questions that they have answered over the years has increased dramatically. And right now, I think they're up to 150 or something like that questions just about COVID-19. So keep an eye out for that. So moving aside from whether you're at will or CBA, Vaccines can be mandated. However, if someone has a disability, reasonable accommodations may need to be afforded to them. And in the analysis here under the ADA is whether someone is qualified under the ADA. You can be qualified in a number of ways. You can either be disabled, meaning one or more of your major life activities is impaired. You can't sleep, you can't sit for an extended period of time, so on and so forth. There's a record of impairment, you've been disabled in the past, and that's something that is ongoing. Or you're regarded as disabled, meaning that the employer considers you disabled whether you are or not. In which case, if any of those things apply, you kind of go to the second question here, and that is whether the individual can perform essential functions of their job with or without a reasonable accommodation. My suggestion would be if someone comes to you and says, I have a disability, I need to not take the vaccine because I have an autoimmune disease or I have whatever the case may be. I would argue that the best approach is not so much to focus on whether there really is or isn't a disability, but really go to that second prong of, is a reasonable accommodation available? And the guidance that we've seen from the EEOC is that, look, COVID-19 is a serious illness. It poses a direct threat to many in the workplace. And so can it be accommodated if you have an individual who has a disability and doesn't therefore want to take the vaccine? And so that's a dialogue that you need to have with that employee. And some of the things that you might consider about what is or isn't a reasonable accommodation is, could you delay the requirement for them to take the vaccine? Maybe take the example of somebody who is autoimmune compromised and they're just not sure how this vaccine is going to interact with their particular illness. Maybe some time given and others taking it will give them that opportunity to see, look, this really is harmful. I can't take this. Or, you know what, my fears, fortunately, are not bearing out in the other people that have taken that vaccine. Or, many of us are working remotely right now. If there's not ability to continue remote work, that is an option. Masking and social distancing, a lot of people are requiring that, obviously, in our workplaces now, but perhaps somebody who doesn't want to doesn't want to take the vaccine and can't because of a disability, maybe a reasonable accommodation would be that they continue to wear a mask and social distance. That may be forever, I don't know, or until we reach herd immunity or something like that. If they work shifts, maybe they could work a shift that doesn't have as many people around. Maybe they can take FMLA or sick leave time, so on and so forth. But the first step is trying to see if you can reach a reasonable accommodation. And it's possible that you just will not be able to. Either shifts won't work, the nature of the job is such that there can't be a reasonable accommodation, such as working from home. They need to be there. In which case, there is the possibility of saying, this is a situation where if you don't get vaccinated, you could be terminated. I would strongly urge everyone to be very slow to take that step. Work with people, try to see how things play themselves out over time here, and do as much as you can to accommodate people as things change. But that is ultimately one possibility that employers have if you go through the correct process, that interactive process. Are they qualified to do the job with or without a reasonable accommodation? And can you reasonably accommodate them without an undue hardship? Or would accommodating their desire to not have the vaccine result in them being in a position where they were creating a direct threat to those in the workforce? So that is a very quick overview of the ADA. There's much more to be said about that. What I would urge you to do is if you decide to implement a mandatory vaccination policy and you get people coming to you and saying, I have a disability, I need an accommodation, to carefully think that through, discuss it with your counsel, work with your HR representatives, and to try and find a good resolution there. So that brings us to the other major potential exception to the requirement that everyone be vaccinated, and that is under Title VII, there is the possibility of someone raising a religious objection. And this requires a sincerely held religious belief, not a vague passing reference to it's against my religion, but a sincerely held religious belief. And that gets complicated, frankly, to determine whether this is religiously held a sincerely held belief, or if it's just one person saying, I don't want to take it. But in the situation where if somebody is simply saying, I don't want to take it because I don't trust the government, I don't think that this is a good vaccine, I'm afraid of the side effects, so on and so forth. Technically speaking, those are not religious beliefs. Those are not sincerely held religious beliefs, and those would not be reasons that someone could have an exception to a policy if you were to require it as an employer. Now, what does that mean, though? I think there are a lot of people in those boats that I just described as, I don't want to take this because I'm not sure. I don't normally take the flu shot. I'm not comfortable with vaccines in general. I think there are things you have to consider there. And one thing is, hopefully, we will have the benefit of time, right? In that it's slowly rolling out. It's going to come to municipalities and counties far sooner than it's going to come to private sector, but we'll have a number of people vaccinated between now and when most employers are getting the vaccinations available to them. And so maybe that will settle some nerves. But keep that in mind, that religious objections are fair objections if they're sincerely held religious beliefs, as well as you need to be in a position where you're accommodating those with disabilities such as autoimmune incapacities and the like. Another clear, or maybe not clear, but another one that bears mentioning is if someone's pregnant. That has not been tested out. The vaccine is still new, and if someone's pregnant, they should be given an accommodation during that time. So I see a question here. Missed the beginning, but where are these vaccine mandates? There are no vaccine mandates yet for most places. I'd mentioned, I know LA County, their school district is mandating them for all students once they're available. I anticipate that, many school districts will make these. But the real question here is, can an employer, if they so choose, mandate vaccination? And the short answer is yes. Yes, they can, subject to the nuances and caveats that we've been discussing with the ADA for disability and concerns, and the Title VII for religious objections. So Kelly, I think I took a little bit more than 10 minutes. I apologize about that.
That's fine. It's an important subject, so thank you, Brian, for that summary. And I will let you know that for our members, we are going to likely be having some future HR discussions, and also probably bringing Brian back and our partners at Heil Royster on this subject matter. So we will probably address this in more detail soon with our HR sessions we'll be holding. So I thank you again, Brian. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and then turn it over to our legislative consultant, Taylor Anderson, to get us started on the new laws review. Taylor.
Thank you, Kelly. Good afternoon, everyone. As Kelly mentioned, my name is Taylor Anderson. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. As Kelly also mentioned early on, obviously everyone's aware that 2020 was a unique year, and with those uniqueness, we saw some changes into normally how session is conducted and the number and types of bills that were considered before the General Assembly. We'll discuss the bills that were passed, how that all took place, this past spring. We'll look at some of the bills that were passed in 2019, but signed into law in 2020. And we'll also talk about the cancellation of veto session and the current lame duck session, which is ongoing at this very moment. But before we talk about those things and delve into the legislation, I want to just do a quick recap of what happened with the election results this past November and what that means moving forward for the 102nd General Assembly, which is set to begin January 13th. All 118 House seats were up for election. The House Democrats will have a supermajority of 72. House Republicans will have 44 members. Previously, the Democrats in the 101st General Assembly had a 74 supermajority, and so they lost 2 seats. The Republicans picked up 2 seats, but they won 4 seats, and so they lost 2 seats that were currently Republican will now be Democrat. So there's a little back and forth on what seats were D's and what seats were R's, but at the end of the day, it will be 72-44 moving into the 102nd General Assembly. As for the Senate, only 22 of the 59 Senate seats were up for election in 2020. Of those, 12 seats were uncontested, and so the Democrats will maintain and actually increase their supermajority. They're going to have 41, excuse me, Democratic senators. The Republicans lost a seat, and so they're going to be down from what they were last year. And so, not much has changed as far as supermajorities for the Democrats in both the House and the Senate. Some of the numbers changed a little bit. We'll talk a little bit later about the speaker's race, which I'm sure everyone has been reading and following along in the papers. But that's kind of where we're at as far as what we're looking, what we're going to be seeing in the 102nd General Assembly. Not much has changed as far as the numbers, but a lot has changed, obviously. Currently, as we stand, there are 3 General Assembly members who will either did not have a race in 2020 or won a race in 2020, but have elected to resign their seats. And so we're going to have 3 folks, new General Assembly members that are going to be sworn in for the 102nd General Assembly who had not had an election, who didn't have to run. And so that's a little bit odd that right before we even get set to start, we're going to have 3 new members. So we'll see if that trend holds, if there's 1 or 2 other people that might resign who won a race or didn't have to have an election in 2020. So with that said, we'll delve into what happened this spring. As everyone's aware, kind of COVID hit right in the middle of the normal session period. And so session was kind of just abruptly canceled. The General Assembly did reconvene late in May at the very end for 4 days, and they tightly focused on bills that were either a direct response to COVID or a result of COVID, as well as the budget. So they only passed a handful of bills. Again, they're all directly in response or dealing with COVID or the budget. That's not very normal. Of the 6,000 bills that are introduced on any given year, we usually see about 14% of those bills pass, and about 10% of those bills become law. This year, the governor only received 14 bills from the General Assembly and signed all of them into law. That was part of the reason why they were able to cancel veto sessions, because the governor didn't have any bills to veto because he was only sent 14 bills, and all of these bills were primarily worked out and were omnibus bills, again, responding to COVID. But let's look at the budget. The budget consisted of about $44.7 billion. It's a large budget. You know, a lot of that money is actually federal, but that was the appropriation. They were trying to be very lean with this budget, but even with the General Assembly trying to be smaller or pass a smaller, and I'll use quotation marks even though you can't see, balanced budget, there was still some tricks and gimmicks to get the budget to be quote unquote balanced. And that's part of the reason why we see ourselves in the situation we're in right now, where the fair tax amendment that was on the ballot in November failed to pass, and the state is in this current fiscal year looking at a $2 billion+ deficit. Again, it could have been much worse had they not shown at least some restraint. But again, you know, Illinois used smoke and mirrors to balance their budget. House Bill 357 was the Budget Implementation Act. Fairly standard. This is the actual authorization for the expenditures outlined in the appropriation side of the bill. So not much, you know, change, not much difference from what we see in normal years as far as, you know, the budget and the BIM. I will say that, you know, one of the things that we were really excited about was finally the passage of the capital bill and getting some of that Rebuild Illinois, those capital projects up and moving, up and running. And unfortunately, you know, we've seen, obviously because of the stay-at-home orders and the pandemic, there's been a serious drop-off in motor fuel tax, which was supposed to be responsible for funding much of the capital bill projects. And we've seen other revenue sources for the capital bill taper off as well. There's been, you know, a fall off on gaming and selling some of those bonds. And so there's been a little bit of a hiccup with regards to the capital bill and rolling out those dollars and being able to sell those bonds in the bond market to fund Rebuild Illinois. So hopefully once, you know, the vaccines start rolling out and we can get back to life as normal, that will change, and we'll have those projects move forward as they're supposed to. These next two bills that we're looking at, again, this is just outlining some of the operational budget. Part of, as I mentioned before, the smoke and mirrors needed to pass the balanced budget, or the appearance of a balanced budget, was the fact that they used the ability, and the state gave themselves, the General Assembly gave the state the ability to borrow up to $4 billion from the federal government. And that's a loan that has to be paid back. So, you know, the budget wasn't really balanced. You wouldn't say you balanced your household checkbook if you had to go borrow money. So that was part of the problem. We've only to this point, I believe, borrowed up to $2.5 billion. There's talk about maybe going back to the federal government in the new administration and the new Congress, once they're sworn in, to maybe try to borrow some more dollars to help Illinois ride out this current fiscal year and the shortfall we're facing. But we'll see. That's not for sure yet. Senate Bill 2099 created the Cures Act, or allowed for, and that's the bill that authorized, it created the Cures Fund, which authorized the borrowing from the federal government, and created the account where all the CARES dollars from the federal government flowed through. So as you receive those CARES dollars from the state, they flowed through the Cures Fund, which was created by Senate Bill 2099. One of the bills that was also passed dealt with COVID disability pay. This basically made it a, excuse me, a presentable presumption that public employees, and this would include correctional officers and prison review board employees, et cetera, could receive disability pay if they were recovering from an injury involving COVID. This was set to expire December 31st. During the lame duck session, I believe it was yesterday, the General Assembly authorized an extension. So this bill will be extended out through June 1st as it stands right now. I think the General Assembly is going to take a look and see the state of the pandemic and possibly extend it out through the rest of 2021. But they're going to look at that in spring session during the 102nd General Assembly. This was a deal that was worked out primarily with business groups and labor. We did have some input and some feedback, as these negotiations were happening, but again, because of where the pandemic is, they're going to extend it to June 1st with the possibility that we could see it extend longer the rest of the year. I want to leave some time for questions at the end, so I'm going to try to move through quick in case there are questions later on. Senate Bill 531. This bill allows a county board to enter an agreement establishing a toll rate schedule. This bill, was passed and signed into law in 2020. It was not, part of the COVID shortened session that we saw at the end of May. But again, this allows for a little flexibility for counties who might have toll roads. This probably only really impacts those in the northern half of the state. But you never know. There's always the possibility we could see expansion of toll roads, toll road access. We talked a little bit about the importance of gaming and the casinos to the capital bill. There's a strong connection between those two. Gaming and casino licenses and bond sales are really going to be a large part of funding the capital bill. So one of the big provisions that needed to be passed this past spring was Senate Bill 516. This cleaned up some language and made things a little easier for the city of Chicago to start getting a license ready to go for a casino that's going to be located in the city of Chicago. That's a huge piece of the capital bill. And if you remember back in 2019, I know that seems for me at least like a lifetime ago sometimes, but back in 2019, there was a study done or conducted in the city of Chicago, and some of the numbers that were in statute as far as the taxes and the assessments and the license fee showed that all of those things added up did not allow for a potential casino owner to make a profit. And so that made the city of Chicago very unattractive for locating a casino. This bill was partially passed and created to address those issues. And so, the hope is that the city of Chicago will be able to have a casino up and running very shortly. And again, those revenues are going to help fund the capital bill. There is a side note that this requires applicants for casinos or riverboat gambling operations must make a public presentation concerning its casino proposal. There was, in the past, there's been a lot of consternation that sometimes the public doesn't feel like they have access at these, the awarding of these licenses are kind of done shadily and behind closed doors. And so this allows for, the public to have more of a presence. If you're looking at a casino, if you're one of the the communities that's going to be having a casino, you have to have that meeting available on the website. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're one of the very few communities that is going to have an application for a casino. Senate Bill 685, this was an expansion that was done because we were hearing from some counties that this is something they wanted to do, and there was some confusion. Well, I should say not confusion, but some states' attorneys interpreted the law more strictly than others and some more loosely than others. So they weren't sure if they were going to be able to do this. But essentially, this was passed to allow counties who so choose, and that's, I think a big key is that this is optional. This allows for counties who so choose to waive interest penalties for delinquent property tax payments for the 2019 taxable year. So, again, because of COVID and the response to COVID and the situation that we know so many of us are dealing and facing with, I'm not sure, I don't know if Kelly has a list of how many counties decided to do that. I don't think this is something that we're probably going to, or I should say, I wouldn't be surprised if this is something that we see revisited in the spring session, again, because I think this pandemic and the effects of it are far greater and have lasted longer than any of us initially thought. So, with that said, I wouldn't be surprised if this is something we see with, maybe extending that out and capturing more years. Senate Bill 1881. This was a bill that was passed in 2019 but signed into law in 2020. And this allows for counties and municipalities to use a third-party auditor to go in, review financial information from the Department of Revenue for the purposes of making sure that that locality is collecting the right revenue. There have been cases where, a business has been improperly located by the Department of Revenue. So, let's say a business is actually in an unincorporated area, but for some reason, the Department of Revenue, has their zip code that it's located in the corporate boundaries of a municipality. Sometimes, and some folks have found helpful that having an auditor, a third-party auditor, go through and look can get that sorted out and maybe increase some of the revenues for that municipality or for that county. So this bill is passed into law. It's now statutorily able to be done. It's something that's been done for years. I know I've certainly been aware of it for 10 years or so, but it was ambiguous about whether or not it was legal. So this clears that up. One of the controversial bills that was passed during the spring was dealing with the election. And so Senate Bill 1863 was an elections omnibus bill and made a number of changes to the election code. Again, and this was really broken down along party lines. There was some concern, I think, that we had about whether or not some of the changes were going to be workable for election authorities. I know I had several conversations with, excuse me, with the sponsor of the bill as this bill was being worked on back in May. And although I say conversations, I really mean text messages and emails because, as Kelly mentioned earlier, we were not allowed, into the Capitol where the Senate was, or into the Bank of Springfield Convention Center where the House was convening their session, as they currently are doing for a lame duck session. All told, I think we were able to remove some of the more costly provisions from this bill. I know that there's still some provisions that some folks were okay with, some folks didn't like. But this, this passed when the law, and some of these provisions, again, if you look at the bullet points, a lot of them are specific, excuse me, to the actual, 2020 primary, 2018 general election. There's conversations being had right now about potentially making some of these more permanent. There's conversations about making election days, for general elections, maybe a state and legal school holiday. There's conversations about allowing younger folks to participate and serve as election judges. So we'll have to see where those go, as those conversations continue into, spring, the 102nd General Assembly. We'll keep everyone informed as those conversations move along. There was, I'm sorry, I should continue. House Bill 2238 was kind of a trailer bill to Senate Bill 1863, which made a requirement, excuse me, to reject, or they stipulate requirements to reject vote by mail ballots, and they added security requirements for drop boxes. As I mentioned about the conversations moving forward, there currently is a bill moving through lame duck session that deals with drop boxes and might extend those provisions past the 2020 election. And so, we're working with the General Assembly as they work on that bill right now. Again, it's permissive, so the election authority would be able to decide whether or not they wanted to have drop boxes or not, which permissive is always, that local control is always the way to go, in my opinion. But again, we're going to be seeing some more of these election bills and these ideas surrounding making changes to how elections are done continue moving forward. And so that's something we should all be prepared for and ready to respond to. Senate Bill 1569, again, this, as a response to COVID, is dealing with remote learning, setting some guidelines. Senate Bill 2135 dealt with remote public meetings. And I'm sure many of you are probably still utilizing remote public meetings. It has been obviously, as we're utilizing now, and I know I've had my number of Zoom calls dramatically increased this year. It's important to utilize these new tools in order to continue to do the work of state and local government. There is a bill, and there will be more bills, I believe, coming forward dealing with remote public meetings. One of the things, or one of the issues I know that certainly as this pandemic kind of enters into year two, is about people that are at high risk, either due to pre-existing conditions or age of exposure to COVID, allowing or making some provisions that they could maybe still meet remotely, not necessarily due to having been already exposed, but the potential for exposure. And so I know those conversations are continuing, and we're all trying to get a handle on this. I think we're doing a much better job. I think the General Assembly is doing a much better job now, but it's something we're going to continue to need to work on. So as you face these issues locally, please make sure to reach out to Kelly and myself so we can advocate on your behalf. If there's changes that need to be made, that either things that work or things that don't work, we need to know so we can express that to members of the General Assembly and hopefully get some changes made. I'm not going to go too deep into House Bill 35 or 357, excuse me. This is the big program which is supposed to be for grant and financial assistance to small businesses or businesses experiencing interruptions. There have been several issues in the news related to how this program has worked or has not worked. It has been interesting to follow along. House Bill 961 was a bill that was championed by Cook County Assessor Fritz Keggy. Again, this is from 2019, but signed the law in 2020. Excuse me. This amends the property tax code so that a person who's granted a senior citizen homestead exemption in Cook County would not need to reapply for that exemption every year. Excuse me. It also forces the assessor's office to conduct an audit on every senior citizen homestead exemption at least once every 3 years. I know this has been an issue that several auditors, across the state have called for, especially during COVID. Having some people, would actually go to the office in person to re-register, and I think we're going to probably see a larger push to expand this statewide. Certainly, I know the auditors, the assessors. It's something that they seem to really want. Now we'll talk about a bill that Kelly and myself testified on behalf of and gave many suggestions to back in this past spring session, House Bill 2096. This was the local government omnibus bill that was in response to COVID. All of the changes in this bill, this is a very local government friendly bill. All of the changes in this bill were driven by trying to help assist, aid units of local government respond to the changing landscape that the pandemic caused. This was a huge undertaking. There's a lot of things in this bill. One of the things, excuse me, that I think we all are proud of is, how the General Assembly responded and helped units of local government, whether it was, making it easier to do public meetings, whether it was extending, certain requirements, dealing with FOIA, making changes to the Open Meetings Act. All those things were incredibly helpful, could not have, local governments could not have functioned without the aid and some of the assistance. And not just to counties, also to townships, as well as municipalities and school districts and park districts, et cetera. So this bill was extremely helpful, as well as some of the other bills dealing with COVID for units of local government. These next two bills are, an extension of that. Both of these bills were sunset extensions. There was numerous laws that were set to sunset in 2020, either in June or in December. And what the General Assembly decided to do was just to extend all of those sunsets out another year. So, one of the big things, obviously, for counties is going to be the E911. That was supposed to expire. We were kind of gearing up for a big push, a big sit down with all the various stakeholders. Now that excuse me. Now that program is going to continue into June and July of 2021. And so this spring, we'll sit down and likely have those conversations we were expecting to have last year, whether it's dealing with, the amount on surcharges And I know that's been a huge concern. We continue to see those funds drop because landlines are just going the way of the dinosaurs. And so we're going to have some tough conversations about surcharges on mobile telephones and the like. But again, they bought us some time to be able to do that. Again, they used 2 bills. There was a lot of different sunset exemptions that need to be done. So they end up using 2 bills. I believe I would be very surprised if the General Assembly this spring was able to get to all of the different sunsets that were set to expire in 2020. Again, just being unsure of what the pandemic still has in store for us. So there might be another bill or bills to extend sunsets out, just depending upon how the spring goes. But I do think we're going to start those conversations, especially with regard to the E911. Excuse me. We'll skip down to House Bill 2682. This is dealing with this is the liquor omnibus bills. In order to help bars and restaurants out, this allow for them to sell and deliver mixed drinks and cocktails for off-site consumption. There is a bill that is moving through the General Assembly right now in the duck session that's actually taking it a step further in seeking to make legal home deliveries, excuse me, of beer and wine. Again, to try and help retailers and the like. And so we'll see and make legal on the state level the delivery of beer and wine. So that bill is still moving through the process. I think we're likely to see, if it doesn't pass now, we're likely to see it gain steam. Certainly, I think we're going to see bills in the 102nd General Assembly aimed at helping bars and restaurants. It's unfortunate. I'm just not sure how many are still going to be around. Some of my favorite restaurants in Springfield have closed their doors in 2020. Actually, 3 of my favorite 5 restaurants in Springfield have. And it's just a real shame, what this pandemic and safety has required us to do and what that's done to the restaurant industry. So I look forward to seeing some of those bills that are going to try to help the industry out. As I mentioned several times, we are currently having a lame duck session. I've been listening to committees all morning, and we'll continue to listen to committees and floor action after we're done with this call. It began on January 8th. It will conclude, it has to conclude constitutionally by noon on January 13th. Today will be the last full day of lame duck session. There have been several issues. I mean, this has been a jammed-packed lame duck session. There have been a whole host of bills that have been passed. And so please keep an eye on the emails that Kelly sends out. We will be doing a lame duck report, kind of filling everyone in, at least on the bills that were passed during the lame duck session. We mentioned I mentioned the speaker's race early on. That is still up in the air. It looks like Speaker Madigan will likely not be the Speaker of the House in the 102nd General Assembly. We don't know who the new speaker is going to be yet. There's been a new frontrunner that's emerged, the last 6 hours or so. But we are expecting there to be some change there. There's already been some change in leadership in the Senate side on the minority caucus. Bill Brady, who had served as minority leader for a number of years, stepped down, and then he's also resigned his seat. So there's a new minority leader in the Senate. The biggest bills of lame duck session, though, have been the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus agenda, which they were referred to as their 4 pillars. Those 4 pillars, excuse me, revolve around healthcare and access, education reform, economic opportunity and equity, and criminal justice and police reform. For our perspective, the 2 bills that probably most impact counties and other units of local government are House Bill 163 and Senate Bill 1792. House Bill 163 is a very expansive criminal justice reform that also has some police reform measures in there. Of particular concern for units of local government is the removal of qualified immunity for law enforcement. There has been a lot of conversation with regards to the potential consequences that could have, and the negative consequences we could see as a result of removing that qualified immunity. Quite frankly, I'm not in, and I don't think anyone is, in favor of protecting, a bad apple. However, placing more burden on the unit of local government for the actions of a bad actor might not result in the type of reform that is the aim of the bill. So that's a continuing conversation right now in lame duck. I know that they're meeting currently to talk about some of these issues. We're likely going to see a couple more amendments and maybe some changes. There's a potential that qualified immunity portion might be removed. The second bill, again, that has, of the 4 that has the most impact on us, is Senate Bill 1792, and this is the economic equity pillar. And tucked away in the middle of this bill was a lead service line replacement. We had been working with environmental groups and the sponsors of that bill for the last 4 years or so, ever since the tragedy that occurred in Flint, Michigan. The biggest issue with lead service line removal is cost, is absolutely cost. The second biggest challenge is the way that the bills we've seen in the past and the language that was in this economic equity pillar deals with access to private property. The bills that were introduced in the economic pillar would force the local government to go onto private property to remove lead service lines and into private buildings. A huge problem. And so, I'm happy to say that we've been working with the sponsors of the bill, and at this moment, it looks like that lead service line replacement language is going to be removed from the bill. Excuse me. It's Senate Bill 1792. House Amendment 4 actually removes that language, and so we're very excited about that. That is a huge sigh of relief for us. The estimated costs, across the state are in the billions, tens of billions of dollars to remove all the lead service lines statewide. So this will allow us an opportunity to continue to work with stakeholders and try to make a bill that's workable for everyone. Obviously no one wants lead service lines delivering water to their communities. If we had the money to get them out, I think they'd be gone. But it's about making sure that we do it right and we do it in a fiscally responsible manner. And so excited to continue to work on that. As it's noted at the bottom of this slide, the 101st General Assembly adjourns sine die on January 13th at noon. So that will be it for the 101st General Assembly. The swearing in inauguration will take place after that on June 13th. And then we will start the 102nd General Assembly and start introducing bills so we can talk about next year. With that, I'll conclude, and I know we're right at 1 o'clock, but if there's any questions, I've got a couple of minutes where I think I'd probably answer some.
Sorry, Kelly and Taylor, thank you very much for a great overview there. I think we do have a couple of questions that are in the chat space, and I'm wondering if you could try to respond to those. One of the questions was directed at, I think it was primarily directed at Brian Smith, but you may want to give some recommendations on where to go for information regarding that question. It had to do with the CDC recommendations on COVID vaccination for individuals with allergies. Do you have a suggestion on where counties should go for the response to that question?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Taylor.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kelly.
The CDC recommendations have been submitted and they're out. We did include information in our last news bulletin, but if you have specific questions with respect to Brian's presentation, you can email me. We'll be happy to get those answered, but they are available as far as the release coming from the federal side on the CDC. So you can go to their website and you can get the information with respect to the vaccines.
Thanks, Kelly. Thank you for that. The other question that is in the chat space refers to Senate Bill 685, and it references not having to reapply for homestead exemptions in 2021. Is this extended to 2021? Is it going to be addressed this week? Do you know if that's a topic of conversation?
That's a good question. I have not heard about that being addressed this week. I will reach out and see if that's still the case. If not, I imagine that will be something that's addressed in the spring session, but I'll take a look and get back to Kelly and she can let folks know.
Yeah, it was my understanding too, I think in the omnibus bill, and I'm sorry, I don't have the language right in front of me, it's a large bill, but I thought there was a 1-year automatic renewal or in there, what the governor signed, but we'll have to take a look at that. We'll be happy to get back with the participant who asked the question and see if we can get that verified. But I believe there was a 1-year automatic, I thought, in that bill, so which could possibly then bring it to 2021. That may not be why it's addressed now, but we'll take a look at that.
Thanks, Kelly and Taylor. The last question that's in the chat space at this time has to do with maintaining recordings of the remote meetings that are required. They didn't know that if it was specified yet, but the amount of storage space that's required for those files may get to be challenging at some point. So is there a current ruling on how long those remote meeting recordings need to be stored?
Yeah, that's another really good question. I believe that's cross-referenced by the Local Records Act, and don't quote me on this, but I believe it's 5 years, but that's again something that I don't have the language in front of me, so I'd have to look that up. I believe that was the intent, was to tie it with the Local Records Act. If that's not the case, that's certainly something we can have a conversation with the sponsors about moving forward. And I don't know if 5 years is too long or too short, but certainly that's something we can have a conversation about.
Thank you. There is one more question or comment that came in. What is meant by reappropriations in the budget? How did the General Assembly balance the budget other than with federal funds?
Yeah, so typically speaking, the way that the state's budget is done is it's just reappropriating dollars. So they'll take basically the prior year's budget and make changes and then just reappropriate those dollars to the next year with additions or subtractions. There weren't any, or very many cuts, I should say, made to this current fiscal year 21's budget, but it was basically flat to fiscal year 20. Excuse me. I think it was, you know, 100 or $200 million higher than fiscal year 20. And I know that seems like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money, but compared to a budget that, you know, is over $45 billion, it's not that, it's a blip, just a little blip. So, you know, in order to actually balance the budget, though, we would have had to make severe cuts, and that's why they went and tried to borrow money from the federal government, and actually ended up borrowing money from the federal government. I will say, just recently, the governor did announce that he is making cuts to his administration. This is something he could do without action by the General Assembly, and his cuts are going to be totaling $700 million. Again, you know, that's in the grand scheme of things. You know, it's not going to balance the budget, but it's a start in the right direction. And so that's some of the ideas that they're looking at, and we'll have to see what else they do to try to balance fiscal year 21.
Thank you, Taylor. There's an additional comment in the chat space that talks about the importance of, you know, mitigation for the lead lines. And I just really appreciate people taking time to use the chat space to share your points of view, even though this forum or this platform does not allow openness of dialogue. I think it is a good place for the association and for others to get a sense of, you know, what citizenry values as being most important. So, you know, we do appreciate you sharing your thoughts there. With that, I want to say thank you to Kelly and Taylor. Excellent job, and so much appreciate getting an up-to-date view of what's happening at the state level policy-wise. So I'm going to conclude for today's session and know that everybody who had registered for this session will receive a copy of the slides as well as a link to the recording for today's session. So thanks again to our presenters, and have a great rest of your day.